All right. This one is we're going to talk about speaking in the project world, which obviously Rick and I have done a fair bit on. So, why don't we Rick, kick off with? I think people know us, so I don't think we have to introduce too much, but just say hi, and then tell us about your kind of how did you get into it? How did you, what has been your speaking journey?
For sure. So it started for me going back to when I was the vice president of programs at PMI Birmingham. And I'll say the name. I love this gentleman to death, but we had hired Neil Witten to come in, and Neil had this seminar he was doing everywhere called the No Nonsense Guide to Project Management or something of that sort. And I saw what we were paying him per head. I saw how many people came in, and I was like, all right, there's a business here. Okay. I wonder if I can do it. And that's exactly how it started. I love Neil, but Neil is a very much do it because I said so kind of guy. He just really was. And at the time I was building a PMO, but I reported to a guy who knew a guy who reported to another guy who was the brother of the executive. Like I had no power whatsoever. And so this do it because I said so kind of mentality just wasn't going to work in my PMO. And so I started to really take stock of trying things, finding out what works, what doesn't work, how can we influence without authority, and wrote my first book to then speak. But my intention of the book was to open doors to speak. Yeah. So I made the decision while I was sitting there in that seminar, and it was about a year later that I had my first speech.
Wow, pretty good.
What about you, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's amazing how these sort of, you joked about how much you were paying this guy and the kind of an incentive to get going. It's kind of how I got into consultancy, because I started working with consultants and they just seemed to have better cars than me. And so I thought, well, something's wrong here. And that's kind of what made have my journey. But speaking was interesting because, I was a consultant for many, many years. Worked for a lot of software companies, etc. I was continually involved in presentations to prospects and also clients. I got involved eventually into kind of the training world of skilling up clients with our technology. So I had a kind of an ever increasing background into presenting. And then I guess the trigger point for me was I went to a PMI EMEA Congress. It was in Malta, and I must admit, part of it was a kind of a go to relax because I had been working on some pretty heavy projects at that point. And but I went to several sessions, and I'm not going to name names. I can't even remember the names now. But I've got to be honest, I was just a little bit disappointed in the presentations that year. There have been some good ones, and I went and saw some people I did know, and they were good sessions. But a lot of the other sessions were kind of a little bit boring. And I must admit, I entered that kind of I think I could do better than this kind of state of mind. So I set myself a target to speak at the following EMEA Congress, which I did, and it was just at that point in time the Lazy Project Manager was born, and I started out that way. So that's how I started. It was kind of like I don't know, there's got to be better ways of engaging with people, and that's what I've tried to do over the last 10, 11 years now.
And so was Lazy Project Manager kind of your first speech?
Pretty much, I could say, yeah. My first kind of the very first one I did was actually on PMOs, which were a PMI organization in the UK commissioned me because I wanted to practice a little bit. So I did 2 or 3 kind of local chapter presentations on that. And then my sort of big launch was with the Lazy Project Manager at this particular event. I have to record it, and I cringe when I look at it now because it's not like the Lazy Project Manager now. It kind of evolved over several presentations. But it kind of gave me that, people were interested and people liked the kind of style of my speaking, and, gave me the confidence to move on from there. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my first speech was making emotional conversations unemotional. It's still probably one of my most popular ones, but being Italian and being passionate, I wanted to write a step-by-step process of just how do you really get to the real decisions? How do you remove emotion and make sure that we're dealing with fact? Mm-hmm. And it was more of a personal journey of mine that I was doing and wanted to share. And it connected with the audience. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was the personal stories that were connecting, right? That's something you learn as speaker, or if you go into any kind of speaking training, they're always going to talk about personal stories. but it is those personal stories that seem to connect. And I think the reason why so many of the PMI speeches are so boring at these conferences, and great material, but they tend to put out process and no personal stories. So there's no connection point. So you can't connect with the material that they're trying to present. And most people remember us, not so much, they remember the thing that we said, but it was the story or how we made them feel about the thing that we said that makes them remember that. Does that make sense?
It does.
That's the number one thing.
I think, and we'll come on to kind of a bit more about the content of presentation shortly, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the stories are just they're powerful in the speaking world for two reasons. One, exactly what you described. People connect to stories. But secondly, when people stress about it, and I get to this when I do sort of presentational skills training, is a story, the story. It's a very safe part of your presentation. It's a very relaxing part of the presentation because you haven't got to remember anything, you've got to learn anything. You're going to tell this story, and you can build that rapport with the audience as a result of it. So it is an incredibly important part of the speaker's sort of arsenal of material, if you like.
Absolutely. And so to that end, one thing that I've done ever since is every single day, I journal at the end of the day. Okay. And even if it's 2 or 3 minutes, but I'll say something funny in a meeting or something funny happens on a project or whatever. And I just want to remember that. Now, I may never use it, but I've gotten better and better at tagging and understanding, and being able to go back and read through and find things. So when I'm ready to write a blog post or I'm ready to write my next speech or customize a speech, which we'll talk about in a moment, then I go through those stories to help find that connection point.
Yeah. I'm not quite as rigorous, but I certainly do reflect after presentations, usually, in days when I used to travel back home or whatever afterwards, it's my time of reflection, what worked, what didn't work, what audience contributions came up that could be reused, that kind of thing. So we're going to talk about, kind of getting started here in this. It's interesting that, we both talked about, the last session we did, and people, if you didn't attend the last one, you can go and find it on YouTube. But it was an audience with Rick and Peter, and it was about writing in project management. The two definitely go in partnership, certainly for me, and I think for you, Rick, as well, in the fact that the book and the speaking, they happened for me at the same time. They were one and the same. The book helped get me out there, get me known, and it was a platform of material for me to speak. Same for you, I think, Rick. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, I'm not saying here that you have to write a book and then you're going to get some speaking gigs, etc. We're just kind of saying that those two things typically often happen in partnership. So how can people get going? I mean, let's say we've got people sitting here on this call, and listen, if you have joined us, that's great. And if you have questions, then we'll happily. We're going to have a Q&A at the end, but if you do have questions, then stick them in chat right now. We'll try and pick them up as we go. But Rick, from your point of view, there's someone on the call, they've never officially presented beforehand. They want to get going. What are your thoughts? What are your suggestions here?
This is going to sound counterintuitive, but it's just to start. It's just to make the decision. So once I made the decision, I started to look for any opportunity I could to speak. But I watch people that say that they've got to practice, or it's got to be perfect, and they keep putting themselves off because they don't, they're llooking for the right opportunity, the right audience. And I honestly think that if you start to speak really anywhere, your audience will find you. And so, and you'll find kind of that sweet spot. So you're not sure if you're going to like it or not like it until you do it. And so my number one thing is just to start. And a lot of times that means a local PMI chapter. It's a great place to start. It's people that they're always searching for any reason to have anybody come speak. And so if somebody locally will come speak, I think that's a great start. I spoke at Kiwanis clubs, Rotary clubs. Again, there's tons of things that meet either weekly or monthly that search for speakers. And there's multiple ways in which you can get it out there, but the goal is to set a target and go.
Yeah. Same here, really. So in my first year, if you look at the kind of gigs I was doing in the first year, it was In the UK, predominantly, it was the PMI local chapters. As you say, they're constantly on the lookout for new presenters, people willing to give up a bit of time to share some knowledge. Within in the UK, you've also got the APM, Association of Project Management, as well. We've got British Computer Society. These are the three ones, because I just knew that these groups were looking for monthly speakers, so there was a reasonable opportunity to get out there. And I think the other thing is, I'm a major fan of like stand-up comedians and stuff like that, and I kind of learned quite a while ago that these guys, they don't just walk out on a main stage, a stadium or wherever, and wow us. They do a significant number of small events beforehand to really get their material honed, etc. And I said earlier on about the fact that that version of the Lazy Project Manager that I did in Amsterdam, compared to what I might do today as a Lazy Project Manager, is hugely different, because I've learned the structure of the presentation. I've learned the stuff that people like. I've had audience participation and contributions during the years, etc. And the whole thing, it's different every time, actually, but it allows you to build. So exactly as Rick said, don't put it off. Get going, get started, and reach out. And it's a very I found a very tolerant community. They're willing you to do well. Right? They're not challenging too much.
And even so, even now, as you were talking about trying material, I try material in every speech now, but I Oreo it, right? So I have that middle story that's a new story that I don't know if it's going to land with the audience or not. So I bookend that with two stories that I know are going to land, that are tried and true and proven. Yeah. And I've had stories just fall flat, horribly,
Yes.
Horribly. And even people come up to me afterwards going, "You shouldn't have shared that story." You're like, "All right, I'll never tell that one again." But that's how I learned. And that's how I learned what my flow was. And so really that audience, there's things that I say that people love that I don't remember how I came up with them. I just know it came out in a speech one time. Somebody liked it. I repeated it. And now that's become a mainstay, but I can't pinpoint where I actually wrote the line. Does that make sense? Or I can't pinpoint where I wrote the joke.
No, I could take the Lazy Project Manager presentation, because it's the one I've done most. I could look at it now and I could break it down and go, and I might, some of it, I might go, I remember that was wherever, and that came up, and I suddenly thought of that. But actually, no, there's part of it actually that was totally unrehearsed. And I remember this one because I use a bit about the emotional seismograph during the Lazy Project Manager. And the only reason that came in, it was part of the draft of the book I was working on, but I delivered the presentation at the Internet Congress. And I realized I was running out of material, and I still had time to know what can I do. And I just grabbed a flip chart and I did an emotional seismograph on the flip chart. And then after that, I kind of incorporated that into the presentation because people loved it. So yeah, this stuff grows all the time. Absolutely.
Yep.
So our advice here is just get going. Come up with a topic that you feel comfortable with, and start making those inquiries out there. So why not? The big question is going to be, why do people do this? Now, some people just do this because they want to give back, and that's absolutely fine. And, you and I, Rick, I know we still kind of give back as well. I think in the last year, half of my time has been giving back. That's very heartbreaking. But, but you don't get paid for everything. And I still do stuff. I still do volunteer to do stuff because I love to stay connected to people. And I'll be honest, I do love to practice new material and new topics as well. But the journey on getting paid, how did it work for you, Rick? How did you manage to secure your first paycheck, if you like, for professionally speaking?
And that became an evolution too. So I always looked at speaking as a way to market. People are going to buy from people that they know, like, and trust. And so I figured if I could paint the picture of what I knew I could deliver on the back end as part of the speech, then that would be a great marketing. So I wasn't really looking to get paid when I first started. But as conferences started to call me back, that's when I started to notice, hey, I've really got something here. It's something I could probably make a living at. And it's funny. I just started asking. And I just started saying, well, look, on this one, I'm going to need to make this. And what's crazy about that is you're the one that's devaluing your information more than anybody else, meaning you're afraid to ask for the $500, $1,000. Now, now the way I do it, and I'll give my negotiation tip away, but I always go, what's your budget? They go, I probably can't afford you. And I go, I don't know, depending on the opportunity, whatever, what's your budget? And I can remember vividly the first time I did that, I was hoping to get 2,000. They were like, can we bring you in for 7,000 and we'll cover your expenses? And I was like, for you, I'll do that. Sure. But I stopped putting a number on it. I started allowing people to put the value, and then I determined whether or not that's worth my time or not. The key is making sure that you're looking at all the factors. The factors are who are the people that are going to be there? What's the opportunity? Is it new material? Is there sales in the back of the room? I mean, I look at all of that stuff. But the key was, I think I asked for the first time and I was like, wow, I just made $1,000. I didn't think, right, for an hour. I could do this, and off we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Same for me, really. I mean, sort of, when I look at year one, there was nothing. It was in my investment, really. I mean, if you do chapter meetings and stuff like that, and they cover your expenses, so that's at least you're not out of pocket. It is your time that you're giving up. Gradually after a few of them, certainly when the book came out, I started saying, well, happy to do it, but are you okay with me turning up with a bag full of books and selling them at the end? And there was never an objection to that. Because I was handling the sales, etc. It was the start of the second year that I was. I mean, the first big one. It wasn't actually paid, but it was my first glamorous one, if you like. Someone had been at the PMI EMEA event and seen me, and they were from PMI Brazil, and they said, "We'd love you to come out, and we'll cover all your expenses, etc." I was like, "Yeah, I'd say I've never been to Brazil," so that was my first wow one. But during that second year, I started gradually kind of introducing a fee and some kind of structure. And Rick, as you said, it was probably a couple of years after that I kind of moved to after I've had a couple of challenging conversations, and I moved to that kind of, well, tell me your budget and then we can decide on whether this is going to work or not. The other thing, I don't know if you do this, Rick. I mean, the other one I get quite a lot with conferences is, look, okay, I have a value, and I therefore have a fee. But if I'm going to be out there wherever it may be, and I've been in 25 countries now, if I'm going to be out there, I'm happy to do a workshop or something, as long as it's adjacent to the conference or preceding the conference, etc. And if you can make some money that covers my fee, then that's absolutely fine. So I'm that's my kind of area of flexibility.
Yeah, and again, the opportunity. But you brought up Brazil, which just is painful for me. But coming back to, and we'll talk about that in a second. But coming back to the
note now, Brazil. Okay, we're definitely coming to that. Back to that.
Coming back to the book and this speaking are hand in hand. But if you write the book gives you the credibility for the speaking. When you first start speaking, you're speaking for free. The hope is to sell the book. So it kind of works itself out. Then once you've validated the market and realize that you are something that people are going to come to, you are a draw, you are somebody that's going to be asked back, then you start asking for a fee. And I think that was just our natural progression, right? You would have taken any speaking gig at the time just to sell the books. Is that fair? I mean,
yeah. Right. Oh, God, yeah, absolutely. I had a garage full of books. I had to get rid of them.
Exactly. I know you.
So, you look at my first couple of years' history. It's like crazy. I was doing like 60 presentations a year in the very first couple of years because I was going to everything to take some books, even if I could walk away with 10 books sold.
Exactly. So I think that's a great path and progression. If this is something you're serious about as a career, is write the book. The book. What I do now too is my books come based on things that I've developed within the speeches. So if I try a story in those bookends, and now I get 8 or 10 stories that I know are working, that becomes the next book. And then that becomes that whole nother platform where I can just deliver those. And that becomes that piece. So speaking of Brazil, the first book, wildly successful. Everything's great. Second book was just coming out, and I got the same invitation to come to Brazil. They put me in Copacabana Beach for a week, brought my wife, had a great time. And I go up to do the speech, and it just bombs, Peter. Now, I'd been translated before in Panama and Guatemala and that place, and all that was great. Go to Brazil, get translated. And I'm thinking the translator is just not funny, because I'm clearly funny. It's the translator that's not. And I realized that my book was based on American references, and I hadn't done my homework. It was based on childhood games. The book was called Stop Playing Games. It was based on childhood games that are American references that I was correlating to games that we play as project managers. Now, if I had gone in and been as smart, which I am now, I would have found out what those childhood games are in Brazil so that I could have referenced those. But this was just, I was too good, too fast, and too cocky. And I mean, I felt horrible. It still weighs on me. I felt horrible at the end of that speech because I was not prepared. I did not deliver for the audience. I certainly didn't bring the value of what they'd given me. It was a huge, huge learning opportunity for me.
Wow. Yeah, we do learn, and we've all got the good gigs and the more challenging ones, which kind of brings us on to I thought it'd be useful to talk about some of our favourite conferences, and I'll kick this one off. I mean, there are loads of places I've been to. I think I've enjoyed all of it, and I've been to America, North America, South America. I've been to Africa. I've been to Australia and New Zealand, and pretty much all of Europe into Russia. I have to say, one of my favourite gigs was the Dubai International Project Management Forum. It was just astonishing. I mean, it was one of those gigs that payment was for me was converted into a 5-day. Hello, okay. Just make sure you're muted, please. Basically it was a 5-night, myself, my family, flown over, business class, gorgeous hotel, food and all paid for, and an event that was it was only in its second year at that point, but they already had something like 1,500 attendees, and it was growing fast. It was sponsored by the Saudi prince. And it was just astonishing one. But I've also, I really loved conferences in Sweden, Germany. I've done Australia, New Zealand. I've done some great ones out in America as well. But Rick, any favorite conferences out there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the overseas ones, just because they provide. Like, I enjoyed coming to Poland with you. We turned that into a 12-day vacation with my whole family, right?
You did, yes, yeah, but not Brazil apparently.
No, Brazil. But my favorite, still, if you were to ask me to rank my favorite speech, favorite conference, it was really my first big one. That was PMI Tampa Bay. At the time, they had 3 days of stuff, but I still am searching for an audience like I had that one. I didn't realize how lucky I was, but it was right time, right material, right people in the room. Mm-hmm. I was fired up. It was really my first one. In fact, I had my family with me, and I remember leaving them at the hotel, and I said, I'm going to go try this. I'm going to go do this. And depending on how this goes, I'll know whether or not I'm on the right track or whether speaking's for me. And it's still by far my favorite audience. And to this day is one of those chapters I get back to. If Tampa Bay calls, I just keynoted their event this year. Okay. If they call, I'll show up. They moved their 20-year anniversary meeting so that I could come in and do a speech for them. So it's been a special relationship with that chapter. But they gave me the confidence to get going. So that by far is my favorite for sure.
Yeah, I don't want to rub it in, but I was invited back to Rio de Janeiro for their 20th anniversary because they loved me so much.
I was not.
Rick, just saying.
I have never been invited back to Brazil.
Dubai was amazing because of its sheer scale. If I have to pick anything, actually, it was right at the beginning for me. It was the 15 minutes I was given at the UK. Project management, it was the International Project Management Day event in the UK when the latest project man came out, and the president of PMI UK was a fan of the book, and he said, we've got a full agenda, but he said I could squeeze you on stage for 15 minutes, and it just was one of the, it was a bit like, I don't know, people remember this, it's a bit like what Queen did at the Live Aid, etc. I rehearsed it 15 minutes. And I was on fire, and they loved it, and the people were buying the book left, right, and centre. It's just amazing. So, I think there are just so many conferences out there of ever increasing scale, I would say. But I've also loved some of the ones I've done for some of the Eastern European countries that are just, they're kind of growing in project management experience, and they can be incredibly appreciative of you turning up. And it's always, we go back to getting paid. I mean, they struggle with budgets, etc. And there's always that kind of workshop option which kind of makes it possible. But they are totally appreciative of you giving your time for them as they kind of grow in their maturity in project management.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the thing that's the most rewarding of a speaker, though, is we really are giving back. I mean, obviously, it became a source of income, but when we first started, it was about writing and getting our ideas out there. And it's when you get the unsolicited email and somebody says, I heard you speak 3 years ago, and I did this, and this has really changed my career. Or I had a lady come up to me in tears in Miami, and evidently something I had said had hit her in the right moment, and she made some changes in her life, and she attributed it to me. And you're sitting there going, if you really know me, I'm not that smart. I don't know why you would attribute something like that to me. But when you are speaking and you say the right words, and that one person hears them the right way, and they come back and thank you later, that is immensely powerful to keep that momentum going, to continue to innovate, to continue to speak. Above all the contracts and money and things that we've been able to make, that to me is the most rewarding thing of speaking.
Yeah. We are going through some difficult times right now. This was a phrase that someone came up with. This year we've gone from Broadway to television in 1 year. You and I were used to going on to some big platforms, some big audiences, keynoting, etc. We had a name in the market. I mean, part of the reason we get booked, apart from the fact we are quite good at what we do, is we also attract people to book for conferences. We are a kind of an encouragement for people to come to these conferences. But in 1 year, we've gone from those great Broadway situations to being, in front of a Zoom camera like this. What are your thoughts on that, Rick?
Yeah, and I don't think it's really changing. I mean, when COVID hit, I had $250,000 in contracts that went away. Mm-hmm. And some of those tried to come back for, where you're booked for 10,000 for an hour, and they're like, we'll give you $250, and you're like, so it's a different world for sure right now. Plus there's the amount of information overload, not just the internet, but everybody's got a podcast. You have a podcast. I have 4, everybody's, freely giving away ideas, that I think the industry itself is going to shift. I don't think it ever goes away from big speeches and keynotes and that kind of stuff, but certainly the people that are putting in the effort right now to innovate and to come up with new material are the ones I think are going to survive on the backside. Yeah.
There's an interesting comparison. I was talking to someone recently about this. So in the UK, if we go back in time, there was this wonderful tradition of music halls. And in the music halls, a comedian or an entertainer or a singer would have an act. And they could run this act for years and years and years, the same act, because they were constantly moving from musical to musical to musical. And different people would come and see it, even if they went back to the same place, because that was just the nature of the entertainment and the cost of going to see things like this. One thing I feel is that we are now on this television, and suddenly this one act. It's a proven thing back in the 1960s, 1970s, certainly in the UK. The comedians who then went on to television, think this is a really good thing, suddenly would die in a death as they went out into live shows, because the audience had already seen it, all their material.
Yep.
One hit on television, audiences of millions, people aren't going to come and see you. So I think if anything, this period has forced, and quite a good thing, I think, it's forced into a greater levels of creation of material, and that, I think that for me is going to be the differentiator for those people who survive in this kind of new world.
I totally agree. And it got to a point where I think it's a reset. It's a massive reset, because I think there were so many conferences, there were so many charges, and now there's so many online webinars. There's so many, everybody's going virtual, that what are we really doing that's going to make a difference, or what are we really doing that's going to hook people? I mean, even as we're doing this, there's probably 84 other webinars going on right now that other people could be attending for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
And so now people are just, it's becoming dime a dozen, and really it's time to innovate and come up with new interactive ways to do things. I've got a friend of mine that's doing a worldwide dance challenge online, which is really cool, and giving young dancers an opportunity to get in front. And it's set up just like American Idol for dancing on the web. It's a Facebook channel, and it's becoming a massive success. But it's people that start to think of that type of opportunity, I think, is going to survive.
Yeah. Okay. Just break it down a little bit. If we continue this conversation about doing events, whether they're live stage events or whether they're virtual remote events, etc. We can talk about a keynote presentation versus a stream presentation, being part of a panel, being opening keynote, being closing keynote. Thoughts, Rick? Favorite slots, whatever. What do you target when you do these things?
My favorite is the after lunch keynote.
Yeah.
My after lunch keynote, number one, because I'm a high energy person on stage and I move a lot and I use my voice quite a bit. I can carry most conferences without a microphone. I just love that slot. People are kind of that dreary, you're tired. They just serve turkey. I don't know why they always serve turkey and put everybody more to sleep, but that seems to be my favorite. But I'll tell you, even with all the streaming and everything else that I've done and the way that we can interact, there's nothing better than in person. There's just feeling the energy of the room, being able to make eye contact with people and really see that points are coming across or feel the audience. For me, it's that live keynote after lunch is my favorite.
Yeah, I kind of concur. I mean, I think my least favorite is closing keynote because people are heading off. Opening keynote, it's kind of similar. It depends on the event, really. I think opening keynote can be quite challenging as well as people start to arrive. It depends on the conference that organises it. But yeah, after lunch keynote is great. As early as possible, if it's a multi-day conference, as early as possible, because people know you and you've got lots to talk about and they're interested and engaging, and you'll have some great networking as a result of that. So yeah, I think that's all good.
Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
I mean, it depends. I mean, I worked my way up the ranks. I kind of, when I first started doing it, I wasn't keynote by any means. I was one of the stream presenters. Eventually, I got invited to talk on some of the panels as well, which is kind of nice. But it is the keynote. It is. You're right. I mean, it is that being on stage, the keynote, the attention, the focus. I'll admit it. It's just a very powerful experience, and I long for the days when we get back to doing a physical event again.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
One of my favorite tips. Are we getting into tips next? Is that where we're headed? We're going to
get there shortly. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I'll save this tip.
Yeah, you say that. Yeah. Before I kind of want to do that, I wanted to kind of think about briefly the future. And then we're going to come back into kind of like the where are we going to go with these kind of things, the top tips and stuff like that. But do you think it's going to go back to what it was? Do you think it's going to go back to physical, or are we going to have a virtual future, or are we going to have some sort of hybrid? Do you think?
I think it's going to stay hybrid, but I think that people are going to be more choosy of which events they go to, right? Because I mean, there was a point where you could go to an event every month if you wanted to. I think they'll be more choosy, but I think they'll be longing for that connection, interaction. I think everybody's tired of Zoom calls. I think if it were safe and people were comfortable, I think they would be in person with us right now.
Yeah.
So I think it's just getting to that safety and comfort again, and the fear of the unknown. But I do think this has changed everything for the long term. I think the new normal is somewhere in between. It's not, we're not going back to the way it was, but we're not going to stay completely virtual. So I think it's bigger conferences, more star-studded, right? You're not going to have that one good speaker out of 9, right? They're going to be 9 good speakers out of 9 at these events.
Yeah.
And I think, I just think that's what the future holds. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think, you're right. I think the first conferences that finally commit and open up again are going to be swamped. I think they're going to. People are. There was reading something recently, and I think we've spent about 13% more time in meetings, online meetings now. I mean, meetings in general, but of course, most of it is online. And that's just it's good, but it's also kind of draining and tiring. And the bit that I find you miss in the non-physical events is that kind of energy, as you said, but also the kind of networking and that socialization that takes place with people. I mean, on the remote stuff, even using all of the neat tools you can do, the reality is most people turn up, they listen in, they might ask a question, they might comment something in chat, and then they go away again and they get on with the next one that's starting in the next half hour or something. I think the future is going to be a bit of a hybrid. I think the physical conferences will come back, but I can certainly envisage, being booked for these and going, well, Peter, we want you to come and, stand on stage and talk to however many hundred people there are out there, but we'd also like you to kind of record something to stream out to a wider audience who couldn't make it today, for example.
Yep. I completely agree.
All right. But yes, let's get on to some tips for people. And I think this echoes what you said. I found this way, the top tips for speaking is be the voice, not the echo. So, have something to say and not just repeating what other people have said, I think is the differentiator. I certainly found that when I kicked off with the Lazy Project Manager, I was saying something, I didn't create all of it, but I said it in a way that was different for people. I said it in a style that was different and interesting for people, and it wasn't the boring, dry, lecturous type of project management stuff. So, Rick, top tips for you think for people out there?
It's about energy. And I fell into this. So, I've got a natural wit and I like to play with my audience. And my first speech that I remember that I did in Tampa, as a matter of fact, and that's how Frank Saladis and I became friends, because we were making such a ruckus. He stopped his speech to come into my room to find out who was making a project management audience laugh and cheer and do all this stuff. But I started by bringing the audience in on that and bringing them in on the energy. So I was like, look, it's after lunch, whatever. I said, but here's the first thing I want to do is you guys had a choice, right? So I was one of the breakout rooms. So you got 4 breakout rooms going on. And I was like, you made the choice to come into this room. And I don't think that's a bad choice. I said, as a matter of fact, we need to let everybody know what a great decision you made. So let's just go ahead and practice a standing ovation that I'm going to get at the end. And it was a joke and people laughed, but they really got into it. And they were making a ton of noise to where everybody else in the other rooms are like, what's going on in that room? And I started to play with that. I even do that like PMI when there's 20 breakout events. When we're doing the big global conferences, I make everybody, I say, see everybody standing in the back of the room, and I make everybody look. And I go, if they're standing there when I'm done, then I've done a good job. So I was challenging them because I knew they were the people that were going to give me 10 minutes. And if I was boring, they were going to go to another room. That's why they're standing in the back. I do that, right? I'll peek in and go, yeah, I don't like this person, and move to another room. Right. And by bringing the audience in on that energy and asking them to be a part of that energy in an authentic way really sets the tone for the speech. And then when you are saying something funny, they've already expressed it's not a weirdly quiet room, right? I've already made it okay to be outwardly expressive, and it really led to some great results. And I had no idea that that's actually a real technique. I just fell into that. But later, one of the biggest pieces of advice I ever heard was to chart the energy of your speech, to knowingly. So what I was doing at the time is I had a lot of energy up front and a lot of energy at the end, but I dipped for about 20, 25 minutes, Peter, and it would get insanely boring. And so all I did was restructure my speech to make sure I was intentionally bringing the audience down when I needed to make a point, and then bringing it back up in laughter or something silly, but making sure that about every 3 to 4 minutes, there was a different shift of energy in order to keep that audience. And that's the best tip that I can give anybody.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I keep mentioning a couple of times about that original Lazy Project Manager. I can see it. It was I started big, and it kind of dropped off during the middle part. And yes, I've restructured it. I think the other thing, the really important thing I learned was to be myself, because I do like
authenticity.
I was taught 80% entertainment, 20% information on these things, and I've done some what seems to crazy stuff. I've had hundreds of project managers singing, Let It Go from Frozen. I've had hundreds of project managers wearing red noses because I was doing about Project Fun. I've done Mexican waves. It's lots of fun because the audience want to enjoy themselves. And I remember about a year into doing the speaking, and most of what I've been doing have been around the Lazy Project Manager, the contents of that. But I was asked to do something for my kind of first private company gig. And I got all very serious, and I did this presentation, and the guy came out afterwards. He said, "Peter, that was quite good." He said, "But where was the Lazy Project Manager? Where was the fun? Where was the laughter?" And I changed because I thought, "Oh, someone's paying me, and this is serious, and they've got to be sensible." And actually, what they were looking for was me. That's the reason they booked me, because of my style and my engagement my fun and my interaction with the audience. So, be the voice, not the echo, but also, be your own voice as well, I think.
And one of my favorite private ones I did was with the CIA. And I walked in there and just announcing that I was going to have fun. And I was poking fun at them like, hey, I brought a thumb drive with my presentation on it. Is that okay? And everybody's freaking out, but I was doing stuff like that, just constantly throwing little jabs and barbs at them. And I got invited back the next year for that reason, is because everybody who came to the CIA was like, it's the CIA. These guys are serious business. And I just came in completely making fun of myself. In my presentation, instead of a picture, I put like a mugshot of me up there going, oh, you guys probably already know that, just stuff like that. Just not taking ourselves seriously. And I think if you poke fun at yourself, and I'll tell you that was one of the other things is, it was my stories of failure that connected more so than my stories of success. If you're telling a story of success, then it sounds like, how awesome of a project manager am I, right? But if I'm saying, here's where I failed, this is what I learned, here's how I adapted, and this is how it worked out the next time, people connect with that more because that's the truth. That's that authenticity. And so your whole point of be the voice, not the echo, the authenticity, like I can tell when a speaker's telling a story that's not theirs. I just can tell. They heard a story from somebody else. They're borrowing a story. They're reformatting somebody else's story into something like they can tell. And I can just feel it because there's no authenticity to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to, I found a way of kind of like you, giving the audience permission to have a good time. I introduced at the start of mine of like, you guys, you know me, I'm lazy project manager, and I teach you about productive laziness and working smarter, not harder. So, you do not have to listen to this presentation at all. You can just drift off and have a little sleep if you like, because you can talk to someone afterwards who was listening, or you can talk to me afterwards, or you can even buy a copy of the book, that kind of thing. With 20% of you to stay awake, so I get a little bit of interaction, and I'll set an alarm so it goes off at the end of the 60 minutes. And people love that kind of stuff. It's like, oh, okay, this guy's going to be interested.
I do a bit on connotation, and I always say, we can hear the words, but we can decide whatever we want. But I make fun of myself on stage when I do that. I say, for instance, like that person over there, they just left the room. Now, I can say why'd they leave the room? Am I that boring? They left the room. I said, or I can imagine in my brain, whatever I just said was so freaking awesome that they had to go call their spouse right now, right? I said, but the point is I'm never going to know. So why do we have to dwell on the negative? And I said, this guy here, he's falling asleep, or he's meditating on my words, right? So the same play, but making fun of me on stage, and that seems to go over really well.
The other one on language, because I think I'm a bit like you. I get quite excited on stage, and I know that means I talk quickly. And I try not to, particularly if I'm delivering to a foreign language audience, because no matter how good their if you like their business English skills are, if you talk too quickly, it's too much. So I do a thing at the front, which is if I talk too fast, tell me your word for slow down, and the audience will tell you their local language word for slow down or words for slow down, and I practice that. And I go, well, look, you have my permission to do that if I ever get to talk too quickly. So am I talking okay at the moment? And they all nod, and then I'd say something like, what if I said I was continually and expansively verbalizing an intense visiting loquacity? Of course, they use the slow down. And I said, that just means, in English, that just means I talk too fast. So, and you could have, you're giving the audience permission to challenge you almost, but to engage, to have fun.
Absolutely.
Okay. I think there's a lot of tips that we could put out there. I think, it is about, don't stress too much about it. Be yourself. But I think, rehearsing is important. I have various means of rehearsing if I'm doing some new material. But, you can do this in a very sort of safe environment. I actually record myself when I'm doing a new presentation, because I can't do the whole stand in front of the mirror. It doesn't work for me. I feel far too confident. I don't want to stand. I'll stand in front of 3,000 people, but stand in front of a mirror, no. But by recording it, it goes back to a point you made, Rick. When I play it back, one, I'm embedding it in my memory. But secondly, you feel a little bit of that kind of pattern of the presentation. You can spot bits that go, oh, hang on, that's gone a bit boring there, and I can change it around. Do you have any techniques like that?
Yeah, my biggest technique is, again, back to disc profiles. I mean, disc changed my career, but applying disc profiles to the speech. So you and I are both naturally high I people, meaning that
Yeah.
we naturally, I mean, I don't need a script. Tell me 30 minutes, tell me two topics, put me on a stage in front of 5,000 doesn't bother me, right? I can go.
Mhm.
But to remind myself that only about 13% of the audience is going to be a high I like me. So then you got 3% is a D, but 69% is the S, right? The other percentage is the C. So I tend to put facts and figures in my slides with kind of an illustration for the eyes. I bullet point the beginning of the speech, and then I give context and story, and then I bullet point the end for my Ds. And so just making sure that I'm very cognizant that people listen and learn differently than the way I
Mhm.
speak, and
Yeah.
to make sure that I'm supporting my point with facts and figures. I'm also giving the header of that, and then I tell a story behind it, which supports it. But just being cognizant of DISC and knowing that everybody listens differently and making sure that I hit each one of those has been my big shift.
Yeah. Perfect. Perfect. Well, look, we've had a good chat. Why don't we move on to some
Yeah.
questions now? This is where the audience comes in. So please, if you've got a question, stick it in chat. That'd be great. We'd love to try to help you if we can, based on our amazing career now, our experience certainly. Um, what have we got? What have we got? I'm seeing a comment here about, don't present or discuss myself as a PM expert. No.
So speaking of disc, I do disc in the kickoff, right, of my full day.
Uh-huh.
But what I do, the first thing I do is I tell a very self-deprecating joke. First thing I do.
Yes.
And the reason why I do that is then I get into disc and I talk about high I, and the high I's, people will attach that we're very egotistical, right? They just, that's the quick judgment. So if I'm talking about project success on stage, that egotistical jumps right in. By
Mm-hmm.
making the self-deprecating joke, I'm showing people that we don't take ourselves too seriously. And then I'm showing them how to apply the I. But
Right.
it's really important to make sure that you're connecting with that audience in that way. So.
Oh, cool, cool. It's just we've got a question coming up, and before we get on to that, the other thing I love to do at conferences, I used to love to do at conferences, is kind of negative marketing, because I just introduce myself to people before I present it, and then I just say, I'm a terrible presenter, and so I do apologise up front. Nothing gets people in the room more, I found, than just telling me you're going to be awful, because they just
Yeah.
go, I can't believe it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great way to start. All right, we got some good questions coming in.
Okay. I'd love the tip to be the voice, not the echo. Yep, with somebody speaking via social media. How do we avoid being an echo? I feel like every topic has been covered. Rick, some thoughts?
Yeah, well, first of all, everything has been said before, but it hasn't been said by you in your unique way, in your unique audience. So, for instance, John Maxwell is a personal mentor of mine. He's somebody I follow. I use John's quotes a lot, but I use how that quote applied to my story. So it's still my story. It's his quote, and I have a way to be able to interject that quote on stage. But even John said something is beautiful. Somebody had asked said, I'm a professional speaker. How do I not lose myself in the brand of John Maxwell? And John actually said, how many times do you have to say John Maxwell says before somebody wants to throw up? He was like, if you don't take it and put your spin on it, so you can say John Maxwell says this quote, but here's what it means to me. Now you're not being the echo, you're being the voice of how you interpret that, and what you do with that information is a great way to do it. But I firmly believe every idea has kind of been said out there, but it hasn't been said by you in your way to your audience.
Yeah, no, that's totally true. The next question we had was, how do you determine the topic of your presentation, and what have your topics been in the past? So, this for me, it comes in three directions really. I mean, sometimes I'm actually commissioned to go and present on a topic, and that takes some work to craft something around that. Sometimes I'm commissioned to present something that I've done in the past because people have seen it, or someone's seen it, and they think that this a new audience would love it as well. And sometimes, and quite often, you're asked to deliver something that fits in with the theme of the conference, etc. And that's a little easier to do. Typically, I've found, but I've spoken about anything and everything to do with project management and PMOs and project sponsorship and having fun in projects, and being productively lazy, and the fight or flight experience, and just a whole range of stuff out there. And I quite like the challenge when someone comes to me and goes, Peter, we'd like you to speak on this subject. What have you got? because I have to really work at that then. Well, Rick, same for you?
Yeah, I tend to pay attention to problems that I'm solving for clients. If a client that I'm working with has, so for instance, I worked with a client recently that was having a really hard time articulating the people cost of trying to get, but it was a $10 million opportunity, and they were squandering around $100,000 worth of cost. And I was like, yeah, but what's the net operating value? And the moment that just came to mind, we worked with it, we workshopped it, it worked. And I was like, other people need to hear this. So that became a blog post of how do you present things in a net operating value versus net operating cost. So to me, I pay really close attention to the problems that I'm solving as a consultant, and then think that other people may have that problem and it could solve as well.
Yeah, and for me, the source could come from many others. I mean, I still like to go and see others or listen to other speakers. I mean, I just find it interesting. It's less to do with their content, really, and more to do with their style or their approach to it. You're constantly learning. But I also read a lot, and actually, I read. On LinkedIn, for example, I might see a post that just triggers something in my mind. I do another presentation around sexy project management, and that was triggered by someone's question at a conference about when is project management become sexy. So any of these things can trigger something that you might file away, and this leads us nicely on to the next question, Rick, which I'm going to get you to answer. It allows you to file it away for the future, or it might be a source of actually a blog article that you can come back to, and they go, that's actually a foundation for a presentation. So anything like that, it's like all things. The more you consume, the more you can actually then create yourself.
For sure.
That next question, Rick, about the tools.
Yeah, I use an app called Day One, which shares a database for my on my iPad, iPhone, and my laptop, so I can get to it anywhere. And I generally have one of those three devices. But I also do incorporate some longhand. So when I go to like a Maxwell conference or I'm somewhere, I'll write my notes, and then I do kind of an ABC on things that I want to keep track of, and I'll come back and translate those into my Day One app. And so I a little bit of everything, but it's sometimes I just sit down with a feeling. Sometimes as soon as I hang up a phone call, I just said something I want to remember, and I'll go open up the app and pop it in there and tag it. Tag it as content, tag it as a good quote, tag it as an article that I want to go read later, those types of things.
Yeah. I guess I'm the same. I'm just not quite as technically sophisticated as you. I permanently have a folder on my laptop, which is just source material, and it could be an article, it could be a link to a LinkedIn posting, it could be, sometimes I just open up a Word document and just pound in some headings or a quote or a few bullet points and save it away. And it's amazing when I can just go back there and I can go through and look at it and okay, I can do something with that. It's a great source for me. That's the great work. The next question was around tips for which organizations to approach to get first-time paid opportunities in the next 3 months. Go away their hours, leave it alone. You know what?
I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm at a point that they approach us.
Yeah.
When you're having to approach conferences, you're selling yourself, and there's a certain point where you'll feel that transition where people start to ask you.
Yeah.
I'll still go. The biggest thing I did when I first started is I went out, categorized all the local chapters, and started watching for when their PDDs were. And so then I would know, I had a tickler file that would say, okay, it's June, go look at these 6 chapters because they normally have a PDD and they'll pay. And so I did that a lot until it just got to a point where enough people were calling me.
I think you can do, I think you can be proactive in a way. So, what I did in the early days was, and it's still applicable now if you wanted to do it, would be, I used to go and I could just search, Google search for project management conferences, go and find out when they are. Many of them will have a statement of when they accepting submissions, for example. And I've noticed a few now are quite upfront. I did one recently for a PMI chapter, but I just saw there's another one, which is the Project Management and Business Analyst conferences over in Canada and North America. And actually, they're very upfront about it, of what they're offering. If you just do a kind of keynote, they'll offer so much in small payment. If you do a workshop, they offer a bit more. I mean, it's not glamorous money, but I think there are some out there you could go and find. It's down to doing some research on that.
Yep, for sure.
Okay, what would you say a big no-no for presentation? Being boring, reading your slides, Eating a digestive biscuit before you get on stage, because that goes badly wrong. Trust me, I know that.
Don't cuss. I like that one.
That swearing is a really interesting bit. I mean, I've seen a guy who came out and the first thing he said was the F word. But he had the authority to control the stage at that point, and he did a great presentation. I mean, be respectful of the audience that you've got. Absolutely. I don't know. Any other thoughts, Rick?
I used to, so again, as a young project manager, there was the one that that you would always hear is you can't put 9 ladies into a room and make a baby into a month, right? Which was just a great analogy. But things like that aren't culturally, I got dinged on that several times. So I had to come up with different analogies. So just you be careful the analogies you choose. There's no better analogy in the world than that to describe it. But now I say just because you put more people into the car doesn't mean you can drive to Nashville any faster, right? Mm-hmm. But just be sensitive of some of those quips and things like that.
Yeah. I did a joke about a project manager, and I mean, I still think it's an offensive joke. But it intimated that the project manager was male, and someone actually asked me a question afterwards and said, "Does that assume project managers are male?" No. There's some amazing female ones, and actually, unfortunately, all of the board, bar one, of this particular PMI chapter were females, ladies, and they were very proficient in what they did. So be careful. Do be careful.
Yeah.
Someone's right. So comment that some PMI some PM chapters have speaker database. That's true. They do.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this because I'm just crazy at this point. We go back to being paid and stuff like that, and my pet hate, Mr. PMI out there, Mrs. PMI out there around the world. It's not all chapters, but this auto response I get back from some when they do contact me is that that phrase of we're a not-for-profit organisation. Yeah, so what? That's not an excuse not to pay a professional speaker. And that's just me being me. I think I find that quite.
No, I'm with you, because there's some very big chapters that are out there that feel that just because they have the amount of people and its proximity of city, that we should pay them for the opportunity for us to get on stage.
I did have one very recently, and the gentleman I was talking to, he said, "Well, we've got nearly 3,000 members." And I go, "Well, that's great. I've got 30,000 followers on LinkedIn."
Yeah, that's right.
Your point is, not for profit doesn't equate to not making a profit. No, I mean they have money, and it's much better when they're well managed and they know what their budget is. And it goes back to your point, Rick. I think we should go on in. What is your budget? Tell me your budget, and then we can have a conversation that's either very short and not waste each other's time in a nice way, or there's room for kind of some agreement here.
So my number one tip I've been doing in negotiating with PMI chapters lately is don't split your budget. Go ahead and even if it's not me, put your full budget to bringing in that big name speaker. And then if you want to fill slots, let your local people fill those slots, because you may have the next Peter Taylor, Rick Morris, or Simon Sinek for that matter in your chapters, just looking for that opportunity to speak. But then this way, you've got a home run speaker. So instead of trying to get 5 speakers at $500 each, get one speaker for $5,000 and you've got your draw.
Yeah. Great point to finish on. Well, Rick, we're at the top of the hour.
Yeah, man.
Everybody, this is just an example of some of the books that we do and how to get hold of us. I've enjoyed it. I always like to have a chat like this with Rick. It's great. We're going to have to find a new topic to talk about in the new year, Rick.
You got it, brother.
Final comment for anybody?
Thank you, gang. You tell me where, Peter, and I'll show up. That's always true.
Absolutely. We done speaking, we done writing. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. We'll find something. Everybody, so all the very best for the, if you're live, then all the best for the upcoming holiday season. If you're listening to this recorded, then just continue to stay safe and get out there and start speaking.